Today's episode of Byte Club is brought to you by Atsap. Have an idea for the next big thing and not sure how to turn it into a reality? Atsap delivers custom software solutions that provide early stage startups and small businesses the tools necessary for sustained growth. Check out www.atsapllc.com for more details on our services. Again, that's www.atsapllc.com, www.atsapllc.com. Atsap, let's build together. Welcome back to this episode of Byte Club. I'm Collin. Joining me as always, Antonino and As always, Byte Club is presented by Atsap. We provide small businesses and entrepreneurs the tools necessary for sustained growth. Check out atsapllc.com to get a free consultation on any of our software services. Thanks to those who follow and subscribe to the podcast. If anybody doesn't, feel free to go check it out. Please subscribe and share. Byte Club is available on all major podcasting platforms: Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, and many, many more.
Yeah, and welcome back, everyone. Today is Friday, October 23rd, and we are really excited for this episode. I know we say that every week or every time we have a new episode, but this one is, I think, really relevant to a lot of people. If you haven't done it yet, I would highly recommend going to Netflix and watching their new documentary called The Social Dilemma. That is what we're going to be talking about here today. The Social Dilemma, for those of you who have not watched it, it basically deals with the quote unquote social dilemma of these different social media companies and how they kind of influence everyone's everyday life, and how they kind of, know a lot of information about individual users and the actions they take on their cell phones and laptops. Not only is this a great tech topic, but it's a great, quote unquote social dilemma to speak about. So I think everyone's going to find today's episode extremely interesting.
Yeah, I think I was a little late to the social dilemma trend. I just watched it last week. I think it came out a few weeks ago on Netflix, and it's streamingly exclusively on Netflix. I think it's a Netflix special. But yeah, definitely go check that out. It's really thought provoking. It's very interesting. My personal opinion is that it was very well. I thought it was well produced and well directed. And we'll get into kind of our opinions a little bit shortly here. For people who are not familiar with the social dilemma, it is basically a film dedicated to, the concerns and social implications, as Antonino pointed out. It really hits home those sort of, implications on society and how it's actually affecting people's behavior and minds. Really, it's crazy to think that a piece of technology like social media can do that. They really go into depth in terms of that. And the one thing I really like about it is that they bring on these people who used to work for these, giant software moguls and software media companies like Twitter and Facebook and Google. They actually bring these people in and they share their actual opinions on why they actually no longer work there. A lot of them correlate exactly with the social dilemmas, point that they're trying to drive home. This is a critically acclaimed documentary already. I think it was featured in the Sundance Festival, I think is what it's called.
Yeah.
Sundance.
Yep. Sundance.
So I mean that's a big deal for like shorts and documentaries and films like that. That means it's like critically acclaimed and very recognized. So definitely worth the watch for anybody who has not seen it.
Yeah, and to your point on that, I think it's one of the only documentaries that I've watched, and there were interviews obviously between people involved in those companies, but there was like also an acting part to it where you kind of had this family
Yeah.
that kind of tells this personal story how social media has taken over this family's lives and influenced their family, in this film to the extreme. but it still kind of is it really brought out the thought provoking part of this film that, there actually is this issue that is affecting everyday lives of everyday people. And, how do we solve that? And that's the one thing that's my only critique of the film is I didn't feel that it actually put forth a solution to the problem.
Sure.
Maybe that's because there isn't one. Um, but that's like one
Yeah.
thing I wish they would have done. Is just, kind of had someone put forth a solution. There was the one guy, the Humane Tech organization that he had founded.
Yeah, his name is Tristan
Yes.
Harris. The Center for Humane Technology is something that he co-founded with another
Yep.
person.
Yeah. So like that right there, like so that was sort of a solution, but I still didn't feel that they actually portrayed like, here's the solution and here's where we have to get to in society to actually solve this problem. Um, but again, it was probably one of the best documentaries I think I've watched in a long time, and I think it's very, very thought provoking.
Yeah. The thing you were referring to is it's considered a documentary drama hybrid. Like that's the way that they market it, and that's the way that they created it. And I thought that was really interesting. I don't really think I've seen anything like that
Yeah,
before.
yeah. The only one that I've seen like that, and it was similar, but not to like that extent. Like I didn't find the acting that was done as well as they did here was Wormwood. That's another cool
Yeah,
documentary.
I haven't
I
seen
would
that.
highly recommend that one as well. But that,
That's a series, though,
yeah,
right?
that's like a 4 episode series or something like that.
Yeah, this is a 1.5 hour film. Yeah, I thought it was really cool. So, like I said, personally, I've never seen anything like that. So, the majority of it was documentary based, in which they had these tech experts giving their personal interviews. And then they had, yeah, this mix and match between that and this family that was being affected. Um, there will be spoilers. I think we're probably going to spoil it for people who haven't seen this. So if you're at this point and haven't seen it, I would recommend going to watch it before you listen any further, unless you don't care about spoilers. But basically, yeah, this family was impacted pretty much like you mentioned at like one of the more extreme ends of it. But I think you know that was basically the point. I think there were certain points in this film in which I sort of felt like it was like propaganda a little bit. Just just the vibe I was getting, almost like scare tactic. But I do think that there was cause for concern, and there was a deliberate reason to have that in the film. I think the message trying to be brought across, you know, is that this could be incredibly detrimental to society as a whole, in this technological age that we live in. So maybe they did go over the top a little in terms of kind of really trying to push this message. I think the drama part of it really got that across.
Right.
So I don't really blame them for having that, but I did feel like certain parts of it were like obviously it's very one sided, but that is the entire intent.
Sure,
You
sure.
know what I mean?
Yeah. No, and that's a great point. And I think that kind of leads into this one point I want to make about the film is I thought one of the more interesting parts was the part about how most people in today's age tend to get their news from social media platforms, from Facebook, from Twitter.
Yep.
And the scary part about it is,
Yep.
say what you want, but there tends to be in our society, more conservative people tend to watch Fox News, more liberal people tend to watch CNN. And, maybe that's not the greatest, news ideal. They tend to be kind of, both networks tend to be kind of biased in their views on the political spectrum. Um, but the interesting point that the documentary brought up about this was that social media actually those platforms start to learn, using machine learning, start to learn about your interests and your likes, and they kind of know, okay, person A is a conservative, person B is a Democrat, and so they start to present to you news articles and posts that kind of fit your personal beliefs. And so they had this study that they showed that I thought was super interesting, where they showed that social media is basically responsible for like the political divide in this country. Um, like
Yeah.
which is like that's like to me that's super powerful because that is like creating a divide in this country that you know you can't like you like how do you stop that? Like you can't like like I don't know. It just it got it was a really interesting point because that's how these companies make money, is keeping you on the platform for as long as they can. They want you to see things that you like and that you're interested in. So they're not going to show you a differencing opinion or show you another news article that might not, sway you to stay on that site. So I thought that was like super powerful because that's like, the technology is cool how it can learn about you and like your personality and your different traits and your interests, but that's super scary because that's a lot of power given to those platforms.
Yeah, yeah, you hit the nail on the head with that one. There's kind of two different sides I want to talk about during the podcast. Here is one, the social implications, kind of how the film dove rather, dived is not a word, dove into these social implications, and then we could also kind of have our own opinion on that. And then the second thing is the technology. We're a pop culture technology podcast. We're two tech geeks ourselves. Um, you know, I really want to dive into the technology part of it because there is a lot that could be talked about there. Specifically like the AI, machine learning, and algorithms that run all the time. On these applications, basically those are the applications. So there's two different like kind of things I want to hit. Um, the part of me for like the first part of the film, just being like a techie guy, um, was very impressed and like in awe at the fact that this technology can just even be developed in the first place. Like I sort of found myself thinking like, while while they were talking about how it's like destroying society and how people are being literally tracked and how they're tracked for how long they spend on a post or how they engage with the post or how long they are looking at a photo, like on Instagram. If you're like how fast you're scrolling, all of that stuff is tracked with this code. And to me, like there were certain parts that I was just like astonished that that's even feasible within the realm of software development. Like that just seems like unbelievable to me that you can track how long someone's looking at something and how fast they're scrolling it, and based off of that, these machine uh, learning, AIs that are built by data scientists on these apps and these platforms, they can just spam ads based off of activity for certain
Right.
users, and like that is their whole market. So there's so much to talk about with the technology, and then there's also the social stuff, which I think could make for a very good discussion, not just with you and I, but I feel like this is going to be very, very provoking for discussions for a lot of people. Oddly enough, probably on social media,
Absolutely.
but
Absolutely.
ironically enough. But yeah, I mean, like the technology it's impossible to deny, objectively speaking, that it's incredibly impressive that that can even be created. Where you're sort of like creating a monster, it seems like, with this sort of the power that the AI has behind it. So at a certain point, you're like, oh shit, we developed this thing, and a lot of the tech experts say like, this is getting very bad. People who worked for Facebook and Google who have left the company since for ethical reasons are saying like this is a problem. It's going to be a very big problem.
Right.
So it's sort of a double-edged sword in the sense that the technology it's so powerful that you're like, wow, this is amazing, but it's also so powerful that it could be the downfall, and it sort of kind of is already, of society.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like if we're starting to talk now about just the technology, um, like you said, of this platform, I guess it kind of falls into the document doesn't really get into the specifics of the technology, but at a high level, this is machine learning and deep learning algorithms. For those of you listeners who don't know exactly what that is, machine learning and deep learning algorithms are algorithms that are self-learning. So the idea is that you write these algorithms that when given inputs, given data, it can analyze that data and make decisions based off that data and how that data influences the projection of what the result or output is supposed to be. And so, like, for example, the idea is that with these deep learning models is that if you input into the algorithm information about let's say a patient, if you give it information about 10,000 patients with these symptoms, and each of these, 90% of these patients have, this disease or this illness, then it effectively learns that anytime you have inputs similar to these type of patients, that, there's a 90% chance that they probably have this disease or this illness. And you can develop these learning algorithms to basically teach people, or teach not people but technology and software, to infer the way humans infer. And deep learning is kind of based off of the idea of the brain and how different neurons fire and synapses fire to basically kind of build these networks of connections to basically make decisions and inferences. And so it's really, really powerful and really, really cool software. But in the case of the social dilemma here, Facebook and Google and these other tech companies are basically using that same type of algorithm, where the data that they're inputting into is your personal information, such as the websites you view, the posts that you like, the photos that you like, and it uses those inputs to basically draw conclusions and learn things about you, and produce an output or a result. In this case, which is what they show to you on the screen, as to basically what it has learned about you and your personality. So the scary thing about it is, it's these algorithms are so complex that they're learning things about you that potentially you might not know about yourself. Some of the posts that it might recommend to you, you might not think of, or are of interest to you, but that algorithm has actually deemed that as something you would find interesting or intriguing. And basically, in my opinion, these algorithms are capable of basically building, a personality, like trait or personality. I don't know what the proper term is, like profile,
Profile
exactly, personality profile of, yeah,
model.
model of a person. And that's scary, because now it's like basically you can take this data and give it to a company, an e-commerce company that's trying to sell you something, and kind of basically provide those companies the information they need to basically target specific people. And that's basically what Facebook does, or all these platforms, Pinterest, Twitter. When you run ads, we do it, we run ads on those platforms, and you can go on there and target people with these specific interests. And it's just the amount of interest they have on there for you to select from are infinite. It's incredible. And like, you're guaranteed to basically reach someone with that interest, which is just crazy.
Yeah, so you unpacked a lot there. So the last portion in which that you said they're trying to build basically a profile of people, is the entire goal of these companies, and they really emphasized that in the film. They talked about they're basically using these deep learning machines to build models. They kept saying models, and they really drove that point home in the film. And in the drama part of it, they had this family, and they specifically targeted the the high school aged, what I could assume to be high school aged boy in the family. Um, and he's actually an actor that you would probably recognize. Like, I recognized him. I don't know what his name is, but I recognized him. I think that he was in Drake and Josh in like the one episode.
I'm about to
I
look it
think
up.
he was
Hold on.
like I think he was, if I'm remembering correctly, I think he was Megan's assistant. I forget what his name was, but it was that one episode of Drake and Josh where uh, Drake and Josh ate the nachos that were like made from sticky glue, and I think that actor was that kid who made it. But anyway, aside from the tangent there, they drove the point home with this guy, basically, who was addicted to his phone, and they were illustrating this point with basically three people. It was the same person, not the same person as the actor, but it was another actor, and there were three of him, basically in a quote unquote control room, like inside of his phone, inside of his devices, and this is a good illustration of how these machines are working, in the sense that everything that he did on his phone, they were interacting with and were controlling the next things that he did in his phone. So there were certain points in the film where like he wasn't on his phone, where he was at school, and they were saying he hasn't scrolled on his phone in 5 minutes. Let's send a push notification to get him engaged. And then the second they did that, he looked down at his phone and then started scrolling on his phone. There was also a point where he had like a bet with his mom because his mom wanted him to stay off his phone. So she took his phone for what was supposed to be a week. And after a few days, these quote unquote people that were living inside of his phone said he hasn't, used his phone in 46 hours, like what is going on? And so they started spamming his phone with notifications. Eventually he looked, and then he was on his phone for like 15 straight hours overnight or whatever. This was a really well illustrated point on how these machines work. The processing power behind this advanced technology is unbelievable. I think they had a chart that came up that said the processing power over time since like the 60s or 70s has gone up by a factor of like 1 trillion times. So the processing power from back then to now has exponentially increased, and it still is, while our brains have not evolved at all.
Right.
So these that really illustrates the power of these networks and these machines, that they are literally exponentially and unfathomably smarter than we are. And the fact that they can drive our decisions based off of that, is crazy.
Yeah.
Like you had said, they're like affecting things that you do, which goes to the societal part of it. Especially, you were talking about politics. They had a lot of political influence, specifically illustrated in the film. Like they were talking about uh, in Brazil, there was a candidate who ran for president, or I don't know, prime minister, whatever the highest ranking official in office is in Brazil, and he won 95% of the votes, and his campaign was strictly on Facebook. Like, that's how
Yeah.
powerful Facebook is he got 95% of the votes. He pretty much ran it through social media, and we live in the age of, they're calling it the disinformation age, where our democracy is being challenged, because the spread of information is not the spread of the truthful information. It's the spread of information that is more alike information that you've already seen. So this was illustrated kind of by you, Antonino, with the Fox News CNN stuff, and then also in the film, where again this teenage child was basically, over time in the film, the more and more that he spent on Facebook, the more and more of a, well, this is a kind of a polarizing opinion, but like the more and more negatively he was impacted.
Right.
I guess it depends on your political views, right? But whatever. Outside of that, they were illustrating it in a negative light. So basically, he started spending more and more time on Facebook, and more time that he spent watching like anti-climate change and, you know, polarizing content, the stuff that is associated with, extremist right wing policies, right? They were kind of painting that as very negative, and he ended up, going to a rally and got arrested. So like they were trying to depict the fact that this kid was so impacted by Facebook that his entire, political arc was being changed, and, you know his behavior was being changed, and the way that he thought was being changed because of these platforms.
Right. Exactly. I think that's like there's an interesting point to that too about the sister in there. And real quick, your point about the actor, he actually is like a famous actor. He's in Vacation. He's in The Amazing Spider-Man. Uh,
Hmm.
he's in Curb Your Enthusiasm. He's in a lot of stuff. Um, but yeah, I think the other interesting part of that too is the part about his sister, where she kind of says like, hey, you're falling into the wrong, you know, you're falling into the wrong crowd because you're uninformed. She was like, like this isn't really happening, and she says like something along those lines. And basically, it's like you had, like Colin had said, is he's completely blinded by the fact that the information that he's getting on Facebook is tailored to how he's currently feeling in his personality. Like this whole thing with the girl, he broke up with the girl. He's feeling pissed off at the world. He's feeling upset at himself. He's feeling upset at the world. Like the social media platforms then feed into that because it knows about that and it learns that from him, um, and kind of paints a picture in his head that isn't actually true. Um, so yeah, it's really, really powerful stuff. And it's kind of crazy to think that while this was an extreme scenario that the documentary kind of points out, and as Colin mentioned earlier on in the show, that's kind of the point of the documentary is kind of make this over extreme example to kind of paint the picture that social media is kind of influencing our everyday lives, whether we realize it or not. Um, it's crazy.
Yeah, that was one point with the disinformation that I don't have his name in front of me. You can find it on the website for the social dilemma. It might be socialdilemma.com or something like that, but they have a list of all of the tech experts that they had on the film. And one of them was a former engineer at Google and possibly also Facebook. Um, but he said one thing that sort of stuck with me was, you see these people with complete polar opposite opinions of you, like specifically politically, like if you are a liberal and you think you have a friend, or maybe not even a friend, who's just like extreme conservative, you're thinking like, how do they see this information and still have that
Right,
opinion?
right.
Well, he said they're not seeing that information. Like that's the whole thing, is the algorithms in you know Facebook and Google are designed so that they provide users with similar and recommended information. So like if I'm spending all my time on Facebook looking at anti climate change and like flat earth and stuff like that, that's going to continue and continue and continuously be provided for me as my form of content on Facebook. And I'm never going to see, you know, the other side of the equation. Like I'm never going to see that.
Exactly.
So, that was an interesting thing with, an example they provided that was funny to me was with YouTube. They provided Kyrie Irving, his flat Earth theory, as an example.
Yeah.
And as a Boston Celtics fan, I hate Kyrie Irving now because he left the team. But also, the whole flat Earth thing was just absolutely idiotic from him. And he says a lot of things that are controversial, but that was one of the things that it's kind of stuck with him a little bit. And he blamed it on YouTube because he said that he got stuck in the YouTube rabbit hole. And you think it's a cop out, but then they also had a former Google and YouTube engineer on this film who was literally responsible for creating these algorithms. And the way that he described it was, the goal is to create these rabbit holes that you go down. So like if you ever see yourself on YouTube at like 11 o'clock, you're about to go to sleep, and all of a sudden it's 1:30 in the morning and you've watched like 25 videos in a row of like, funny pranks or like home videos or whatever, like all of those things tying together, like that is a direct tactic that YouTube has built into their
Yep.
algorithm, is these quote unquote rabbit holes that you go down. And that's literally what it is. Like, it's unbelievable that algorithms and the networks that are being built have such a large influence on the information that I am seeing, and also with Fox News and CNN, like the news and media outlets now are just so polarized, especially the last few years, that it it's hard to get like neutral content.
Absolutely.
Like I'm not
It's
even sure that
almost
exists
impossible
anymore.
now. Yep. I would
Like
agree.
let alone social media. Take social media completely out of it. Just standard good old national media. Where can you find neutral reporting? Because I haven't found. It's not like I'm spending all my time on the news, partly because of this political landscape we're in. But like, where can you find that? I'm genuinely curious.
Exactly, exactly. And that's like, I think, this show does mention, like I mentioned earlier, the part of like, there's studies that show that social media, excuse me, there's studies that show that social media is basically responsible for the political divide in this country. And that's crazy to think about. Um, and to your point too, the other thing that I thought was super interesting was, I believe it's the guy who founded the Humane Technology Society or whatever it's called. He brought up this point.
Center for Humane Technology.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because he had brought up this point.
Tristan.
What is his name? Kriston?
It's spelled like Tristan Harris, but it's
Tristan.
Tristan.
Okay. Yeah,
Tristan.
but he brought up this interesting point too, where he was like a UI designer at Google, and he had wrote this how this organization started. He had wrote this basically proposal to the Google executives that like hey, I'm working on Gmail, but we have all these psychologists from like Stanford coming in and kind of helping us design Gmail so that people don't leave Gmail. He's like, I thought that email was a tool so that you don't have to be constantly you know having meetings or communicating with people. And he brought up this really interesting point too, where these deep learning algorithms and these social media platforms and these social platforms are kind of they started out as tools to help the human race, to help society, to make it more efficient, to make it better. But it's coming into it's no longer a tool now. These tools have basically influenced our society and have influenced people, um, ways of life. And I thought that the Gmail thing was so interesting to me because that's true. Like email is supposed to be a tool to help you communicate in business, help you communicate in the world. It's not supposed to be something that's supposed to drag you into never leaving it. Um, that's another point too that I just thought that was incredible. I think that too, even with the going off your point about the news, is in my opinion the news was started as a tool to basically inform the public about what is going on in the day-to-day world, in your neighborhood, in your state, in your country. What is going on. It is now with these new technologies turning it into a no longer a tool, but a way to basically suck people in and get your attention and get your viewership to basically drive up their bottom dollar. That is these companies' absolute business model is keep you on the platforms for as long as possible without leaving so that they can drive up your revenue because you in fact are you know the reason why these companies make money. And I thought that the last point I'll make about this is I thought one of the interesting points to the documentary was someone in the documentary mentions that the social media companies are the only people that don't call their customers customers. They call their customers users. Because the only other people that do that
Yeah, yeah,
are drug dealers. It's like, like
yeah.
that was like a powerful point because it's like these companies, they don't care about your well-being. They don't care about what information you're reading or how that's influencing your everyday life. All they care about is that you're spending hours on their platform and they're making a boatload of money off of you.
Yeah, that was a quote that I wrote down also in my notes when I rewatched it today a little bit. It was there are only two industries that call their customers users: illegal drugs and software. Edward Tuft, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, that was who quoted. That was who was quoted. Um, and I thought they did that also really well. They occasionally went to a black screen and they just had a little quote up with something that someone said. I thought that was very
I
powerful,
agree. I agree.
just from a production perspective. But like, yeah, that is the entire model of these companies is manipulation. So they're manipulating human psychology in to drive engagement and growth for revenue. So another quote that was said is, uh, if you have these free applications, right, and if you're not paying for the product, then you are the product. That was also another thing that I wrote down, which these apps are free for users to use. They're again say users. It's such a natural thing to say. As a software developer, is users, end users, whatever. It gives it a special kind of connotation now after watching that. But anyway, it's free to users of the application. Advertisers are the customers for the businesses because they're funding basically the application so that they can get their word out. And we are the product. Our data is being sold. Like, in a way, we are being sold. That's another point that they were really driving home. Um, is that they sell like certainty in the sense that they're selling the data that we have for our person. Like, they're selling our data um, to advertisers for revenue. So advertisers pay $1 million. They say, Facebook says, this is the most efficient way that we can 100% guarantee that you're going to get, you know, 10,000 more customers. That's $1 million. So $1 million, and then 100,000 people's data is just ripped and thrown into the algorithm. And then these predictions and suggestions are made, basically, surveying over the people. Everything is tracked on the internet. So another thing that Tristan said is basically it was surveillance capitalism. There were a lot of really good quotes in this movie that I wrote down, and I'm kind of just spatting them out. But like, basically, we are the product. Our data is being sold. That's the whole point. That's the whole business model, is
Right.
that we're going to manipulate how people spend time on the application and engage with the application.
Absolutely. And so let's dive a little bit deeper into this discussion here, this topic, because I think this brings up a really interesting discussion point as well. Where so if you take this idea that the users on these platforms are the actual product that's being sold to the actual customers who are the businesses. Now,
Mhm.
that's Facebook, that's Twitter's, that's Pinterest, that's all these social media companies' business platform. Now, that's a huge problem. I see that problem. I agree with, I think most people agree that that's a huge problem, that our data is being sold in a way that can manipulate us. I mean, that's a big problem. But the flip side of that is, how are these social media companies going to make money? People are going to be
Yeah.
pissed if tomorrow Facebook and Twitter close down because they don't have the revenue to keep their operation running. What's the other option? You make users pay to use this platform, and or whatnot. Like, how do you like how do these companies then make money to have to enough money to stop doing what they're doing? What is the solution here? Like, I think that is like something that the documentary didn't talk too much about, but like that like, how do you solve that?
Yeah, I'm not even sure there really is a true solution. Like, the solution that you could come off the top of your head right now is just delete the source code for the app. Delete Facebook off, the face of the planet. Okay, well, why would Mark Zuckerberg do that? Because
Right.
he's a billionaire. Facebook is $1 trillion company. Everything in this world is driven by a monetary value, and it's purely, based on, revenue. So Facebook has investors who have given money to them. So, it's not like they'd be losing their own money. Like, they have investors that, they're liable for. You know, it wouldn't make sense from a business perspective, like, strictly speaking. Like, they don't have a monetary incentive to change anything. Like, they could have all these court cases, like Mark Zuckerberg could go to court and they could talk about the ethics of storing data, and they could kind of edit the way that they're doing it so that they're not breaking any like regulations, but they have no incentive to change what they're doing because they're literally worth $1 trillion.
Absolutely.
Like, why, if you're worth $1 trillion, like, why change what you're doing?
Exactly. I think you hit the nail right on the head there. Um, and I think that there's another part. Speaking of Mark Zuckerberg in that documentary, where they talk about the one ex Facebook exec talked about how they basically had discussions where they could just have Mark go in and like turn a knob, like, hey, we want to get more
Oh, the
yeah, the
dials.
dial thing,
Yeah.
yeah, we just want to get more users and more ad revenue in Brazil. Let's just turn up the knob. We want to increase the amount of users in Arkansas. Turn up the knob. Like that to me, that's what's also powerful too, because now, like, you have one person who can basically control the you know and control and influence people's opinions. Like, I think that right there, like, that should be a regulation. Like, Zuckerberg being able to basically control when and where he wants more users to be on the platform, that's wrong. That should be illegal. But in terms of the
Yeah. I
algorithm
don't,
itself
yeah.
just doing this work, I don't necessarily see the problem, because like that's their entire. I mean, I see the problem, but I don't think it's like inherently evil. Is my point, I guess.
Yeah. Tim Kendall was his name. He's the former executive of Facebook and also the former president of
Yep.
Pinterest. Um, yeah, he said that they had discussions with Mark, just like having these dials of exactly what you just said. He said they had discussions that he made it sound like that is not a thing that exists, like that they're currently using. I guess we'll never know, but the fact that that could even happen, hey, I want more users in Korea. Let's just bump up the monetization on the ads, and we're gonna get 100,000 users today in Korea. Like, it is unbelievable to me that that is something that it just so easily, just comes right off the top of your head as someone who's worked at Facebook as like an executive. Say, yeah, we can just do that.
You're
You
right.
know, we we could do that. Yeah, it would take 2 seconds to do that. 2 seconds to 2 seconds to make you know $10 million in ad revenue.
Yeah. Like how do we get one
It's
of those? I would love to just have a knob that turn. Yeah, I want to increase the number of clients we have this month. Just turn up a knob. That'd be fantastic.
but yeah, that begs the question. Like, how do you change the mold? Like, if you are building a social media platform and like we have an idea for like a social media application, like, so I'm kind of thinking like, if to turn this into a $1 billion idea, or turn any idea, oh, I got the next Twitter, I got the next idea for Twitter, you know, you can grow that organically yourself, but at a certain point, how does that become a billion or $1 trillion business without you having to follow in the same footsteps? That's basically like the standard playbook for these social media companies. Like, how can you scale at that speed like Facebook did in such a rapid pace? How can you scale like that without doing a similar thing? Like, can you truly build a social media platform and advertise it as like, our pitch is that we don't sell your data. Like, we are an ethical social media application. There's going to be people who appreciate that and sign up for it, but like, is an application like that going to be able to scale at such an exponential speed? Like, I don't think that that is possible. Like, I don't think that's something that people have thought of yet.
Right. Yeah.
Or if, yeah, like, can you even do that? Like, who knows? Because if an advertiser wants to advertise on your platform, but you're not willing to have these sort of networks that just willingly share people's data, how can you guarantee your advertiser that you are going to, you know, perform for them? Otherwise, like, how do you choose where to show that ad? That's why Facebook is so good to have all of these different types of, A B testing and everything that you can run ads. Like, how do you do that if you are not selling data?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Um, that's a great point. Um, yeah, dude. I don't know. It's like but I guess my other thought on that is that let's just say we had a social media platform that we grew organically, and we didn't try to basically manipulate people's thoughts. The other thing I thought that was interesting about that is someone in the documentary brought up the point that there's some, like, just because we have friends on Facebook or friends on Twitter doesn't mean that you'll actually see what your friends are posting, because like it doesn't necessarily fit into that algorithm. So let's just assume that we create a social media platform that only lets you see what your friends post, and it just truly just shows you in a chronological order the posts that are coming out from your friends or the people that you follow. Like, can you still have the business model of throwing out ads there? Is the value of Facebook the fact that they have 1 billion users, or more than whatever it is, a billion users? Is that the value of Facebook, or is the value of Facebook that the fact that they can target so precisely with these ads the type of users, quote unquote, that these businesses want to have? Like, where is the value in these companies? Because if the value in these companies is strictly the amount of users, then I think that, yeah, you can create a safer social media platform that doesn't require the manipulation aspect of this. Um, but the true value of these corporations is that the fact that they can actually pinpoint with like 100% certainty that this user is going to actually like or be interested in your product, then no, there's no other way to kind of you know build a business model around that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was probably someone. I think someone who worked at Google. They were talking about how it's almost like playing a slot machine. Like if you have your phone on a desk and it's face down, and you're just like, 5-10 minutes will pass, and even I do this where like I'll have my phone next to me, and like 5 or 10 minutes will pass. I'll be working on something, and then I just look over to my phone, and I'm just like, hey, do I have anything on my phone to look at? It's like playing a little virtual slot machine that you're saying like, ooh, like, am I gonna have a notification on my phone?
Right.
You know, um, it's that's one of the ways that they just absolutely ripped through user engagement is the use of like pop up notifications. And one thing with Facebook is the photo tagging. They use photo tags. So like if you see an email, one thing in the film was if you see an email that the subject line is Antonino tagged you in a photo, and you open the email and there's a link to Facebook, I'm 100% going to click on that link to see that I was tagged in a photo by Antonino. You know, but that begs the question: why not just send the photo that I was tagged in the email? That doesn't drive engagement. The way to drive engagement to your app is to have an email or a notification that says you were tagged in this photo. It forces you to open the app. You see the photo, you interact with the photo, you comment, you like, and then you're on the application, and you're going to spend 10 more minutes on that application. You know, it's these sort of things that they did that, you know, like it became specifically Facebook. It's how they grew so fast and became kind of the formula for other companies to follow.
Right. Right. That's a great point. Um, yeah, dude. I just like I don't know what to say about some of these topics just because we run our own business, we operate our own company, and our end goal is to drive a profit. And I
Mhm.
personally, like on a personal level, if I was the head of Facebook, if I was Mark Zuckerberg and I was running Facebook, and I knew that I could absolutely, without a doubt, drive the amount of profit and revenue that they're driving per month, why would I, like you said earlier, there's no incentive to not do it this way. Why would I change my business model when it's working so well?
Yeah, I think like 95 out of 100 people would have a similar opinion. I mean, there are people out there who, not everything is about money. Like, I understand that, but, money drives human behavior arguably more than anything else. Like, if I was presented with the opportunity to make $100 million in 5 seconds, and all I have to do is, you know, sell 100,000 people's, name and age and gender. Like, who is not going to do that?
Right.
And it's not explicitly the fault of these individual companies like Facebook, Twitter, Google, YouTube, who's owned by Google, like Snapchat, Instagram. I don't think they were not inherently evil, and I think you said that earlier, and deliberately evil in what they were doing. I think it's sort of gotten away from them, and now they're sort of at a point of no return. Um, I'm not going to personally blame like these individual companies for some changes in society, more as I would just say like social media and media as a whole. Like, I don't think it's fair to say like you know to Mark Zuckerberg like you're the reason that you know more teen girls than ever are like committing suicide or harming themselves, which was a thing that was in the film. I don't think it's fair to that individual company. I think it's more of an overall social media as a whole. Like, the one thing that they shared um, is with mental health. I think it is worth bringing up is that there's a direct correlation between like 2010 and 2011 when the real peak of social media started. That there's a direct correlation between the teen girls that uh, committed suicide or were just put into hospitals. So I have these two pictures from the documentary: U.S. hospital admissions for non-fatal self-harm. Girls aged 15 to 19. From 2009, which is when I guess they're saying Facebook and other social media kind of really hit stride, went up 62%. And girls aged 10 to 14 went up 190%. And then US suicide rates in that same year, since that same year, girls aged 15 to 19, 70% increase, and 10 to 14, it went up 151%. So it's like these social media platforms, social media as a whole is driving, this sense of self-worth and like insecurity for, young teenagers and younger people whose brains just simply are not developed. They're just not fully developed. And, you post a picture on Snapchat or Facebook and you can have 100 people commenting on your picture, and like, 10 of them might have something nasty to say and the other 90 might have something great to say, but you're only going to focus on those 10 people. Like our brains were not our brains are not developed enough to program to react to hundreds of people reacting at one time to us, you know? So it is a problem. And like, you see it all the time. And it's really unfortunate that, cyberbullying and everything happens on these social media platforms because it's so easy for people to do that, electronically and just lash out. And there's really no way of stopping it. Like that's one of the more tragic impacts I think that these platforms have on society is that, you know, I think this is like the first generation, like Gen Z, which is kind of what we're a part of. I think we're technically Gen Z, right? We're not millennials. I think the cutoff was 96.
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
Like we're considered the first generation that had social media in middle school. So like if you think of it that way, you know, you grow up using social media and that really is going to influence how a lot of people develop as just human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. You brought up a really interesting point about social media and the suicide rate in the country, and I don't know if it was in this documentary or if I was reading some other article, but basically, like I believe it was Facebook. One of these platforms basically kind of developed technology that would kind of know when people might self harm themselves. And so they had basically developed this platform where they could essentially notify authorities like, hey, there's something weird going on. There's something violent or something dangerous that could potentially be going on in this house or this location, and can basically dispatch the authorities to that location. And while personally I think that's a great idea, I think there'd be a lot of pushback on that because just imagine that, like, I'm sitting in my home and, a domestic dispute breaks out, and somehow Amazon's Alexa or, Facebook, somehow its algorithm figures out that like there's, a dispute going on, and the police just get dispatched to my house. That's great. Like it could potentially save a life, but it's also like a complete invasion of privacy. Like
Yeah.
that's like a gray area that these platforms are kind of crossing into, um, that like is just in my mind. I don't know if it's like the right thing to do. Like I'm just thinking, like, let's just say, for example, the government decides to like basically hold these social media companies accountable for the suicide rate increasing in the country. What are they going to do? They're not going to shut down social media because there's too much money involved. They're going to probably try to enforce regulations or put responsibility and liability on these companies to try to do something about it to prevent that. And what's those companies' solution? Is it, oh, we'll just, we have an inkling of when something bad might happen, we'll dispatch the authorities. Like people aren't going to want that. Like that's like a complete invasion of privacy. Um, I don't know, dude. My point being is that this we're in an interesting time in the world because we're like right at the like sort of front end of all this social media stuff. And I think this is a whole new ball game. Like when it came to TV and, radio and, putting on regulations as, okay, you can't swear on the radio. If you do, it has to be after a certain hour. You can't have nudity or profanity on TV during these hours, or they can't be on these channels. And that's like, HBO spiked because they could, have nudity on their channel, but you had to pay for it and whatnot. Like, this is a whole new ball game. Like, what regulations can we put on these companies or these industries to protect the children of the United States, the children of the world? Like, sure, you could, like, block nudity and profanity from these sites, but like, I don't know what you do to prevent people from not being sucked in, because like it's the whole idea of these like online communities, these online social platforms that, their whole intention, their whole idea, the whole business model is to drive users to the site. And so how do you put a regulation on that whenever it's a free country and people can choose to basically do whatever they want with their free time? Like, I just, like I said at the beginning of this episode, I do not think that there really is a solution to this problem, which is scary. But I don't know where we go next as a society to fix this issue.
Yeah, like you said at the end there, like we live in a free country. One of the biggest things with these platforms is, the First Amendment, like the freedom of speech. So like, at what point do you censor what's being said? What you brought up with listening or calling the authorities based on some, online activity or people's activity. That sort of goes back to the the third episode that we had where we were talking about, Amazon Alexa um, caught the and then like catch the recording of someone who like broke into someone's
Yeah,
home
there
or
was like
something.
there was a domestic dispute, and like either the husband or the wife shot one of the other people, and it was like, caught on recording, and the Department of Justice tried to use that in the court case as, evidence, but Amazon refused to give up that recording because they said like that would be a complete invasion of users' privacy. Like they admitted that they do record everything that's going on, but like, if people knew that Amazon was afraid that if people knew that they would just, hand over these recordings and these personal information, willy-nilly, that they would lose trust in Amazon and trust in their products.
So they invaded people's privacy by listening in, but they don't want to invade people's privacy by sharing the recordings with the
That's it.
court.
That's
Okay.
exactly right.
But yeah, like then you have like Facebook and Instagram. Like if I post a picture of me naked, like, at what point does that get taken down? Like they have people working and basically mostly software working to do that. It detects, you know, nudity, profanity, threats. Like I can't like go on Twitter and like threaten Donald Trump like over and over and over again. Like if you did it once, you'd probably be fine. But like if you did it like over and over and over again, the same on like Google. If you look up like, stuff that would get you on a watch list, like how to build a bomb or something. Like you do that one time, you're probably fine. But if you continuously do that, like you're gonna get put on a government watch list.
Right.
So it's like there's algorithms and software in place that do this sort of thing. But if you're a Facebook, like they have had their struggle with monitoring like hate speech because of the First Amendment. I think they recently just came out and said that they're banning all anti-Holocaust, you know, propaganda from Facebook. So people who are saying, that didn't happen and they're, talking about it, super negatively. Like Facebook just finally came out and said that they're gonna, not allow that anymore. They're gonna censor that. Which I'm sure had a lot of people in outrage, but probably the majority of people are fine with that, as normal people should be. But you know, that's a main concern. If I build a Facebook and I am the owner and CEO of Facebook, you know, the First Amendment should give privilege to people to speak freely, but if they're using that right and privilege to do something that is harmful to others, then obviously you need to go and censor it. But it's not such a black and white subject. It's a very gray topic.
Right.
There's a very fine line there to run across.
And to that point, I think that, I would not have a problem. Like, I agree with you, the anti-Holocaust thing, those, those should be censored. But I wouldn't have a problem with like people saying what they wanted to say on those platforms if these platforms weren't designed to basically like disinform people, like,
Yeah, 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 yeah. I got you.
if it wasn't like, if it was just, you decide to voice your opinion on something that was just completely outlandish, like, and I saw it, that's fine. But the fact that, like, now I'm going to see 30 different posts about that same topic and trying to influence me to like believe in that, that's where I think it gets dangerous. I think that, like, that's, I think we would agree that that's the issue.
Yeah, and I certainly don't think that's their goal, but their goal isn't to have that negative impact. Their goal is to make as much money as possible, and by doing so, or in order to do so, they need to recommend similar activity and behavior to users so that they can run ads that would appeal directly to those users. And then the unfortunate nature is, you know, if I'm spending all my time on Facebook looking at, like anti climate change stuff, that's some of the only information I'm going to see. And then advertisers who align with that line of logic and have products that, or just have a brand that is like anti climate change, that's a perfect spot for them to advertise.
Right.
And Facebook's going to, they're going to take that money. It makes sense. It's just an unfortunate circumstance of something that otherwise, logically made sense to a business. And now it's kind of irreversible.
Right. I agree. I agree. Yeah. Some crazy stuff, my man. It's interesting, but also kind of scary.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much to unpack from this film. Like, if by some miracle you have not seen the film yet and you've made it through this entire podcast, you need to go watch it. Um, there's we've talked a lot about it, but there's so much more that you should go watch. It talks about a lot of the stuff we already talked about, the social implications, where society is going, where it already is, the technology. There's also some other interesting things that we didn't touch on. Like it does briefly talk about, it has people who are in charge of like the growth of Facebook talking about how specifically they did it with like what they call like growth hacking and the A/B testing, which we kind of briefly test on, is like companies will release different versions of updates of the app. So like if you ever see like your friends say like I have this version of Snapchat, but someone else has another version of Snapchat, it could be dependent on the phone like model you have or the iOS that you're running or Android that you're running. But there is a chance that it's part of this A/B testing where I have version A and you have version B. 100,000 people have my version, 100,000 have the other version. What version works best? Which version gets the most engagement and positive feedback from users, and then that's the one they go with, and then they go with like an AC test. That's something that Facebook did, and the VP of growth at Facebook, I don't have his name, but he was shown on the film giving some presentations about how specifically they did that, and it's very intriguing. And then he also says like he comes back and says, that's how we did this, and it was absolutely great, but now it's very, very bad. So
Right. Right. I
yeah,
think it's easy to look back on something and say like, "Ooh, that was kind of a gray area." When you're there and you're in the cutting edge of developing these new platforms, it's kind of hard to realize what you're actually doing or the implications it has down the road.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's something like this is such a large topic of discussion, which I'm glad that we talked about it because the second I saw it, I texted you. I was like, "This is our next podcast. Like, we have to talk
Yep.
about this. It's like a hot topic. Everyone's going to be talking about it, and we should share our opinions on it."
I agree, and I think we did that, and I would love to hear from some of our listeners some feedback. Um, you know, uh, if you have any thoughts, or like provoking thoughts on this topic, um, you know, send us an email at byteclub@atsapllc.com, and maybe we can bring up one of those discussion points in a future episode or write about it in our blog.
Yeah. And also, Hopefully, right about the time that this podcast is dropping, we'll also have a blog article written on a similar topic. We're going to try and do that a lot with more topical episodes of the pod. Um, if we're talking about a specific thing, we want to have blog articles that talk similarly about it. Maybe for people who don't like listening to podcasts, for an hour, they can just read something that's like a 3-minute read and get a similar experience out of it. So that's something that we're definitely going to try doing. So keep your eye out for that. I think this is a good jumping off point here for us. If you don't have anything else, I think we're probably going to wrap it up. Thanks for everyone who listens as always. And, if you have friends, family, grandparents, pets you think would like listening to the
Dogs
podcast,
love the podcast.
please subscribe and share it to as many people as possible. Thanks always for supporting Antonino and myself. And go check out Atsap LLC for details on the services and stuff that we offer. If you have feedback on the podcast, feel free to check us out on social media platforms. Ironically enough, this was all talking about social media, but you're going to find the podcast on social media. So if you like or dislike, hate, or have comments about the podcast, feel free to reach out to us on social media, or you can contact us directly on our website. So,
Yep.
Thanks for everyone who listened, and we're going to catch up with you next time.
Yep.
Peace out.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Byte Club. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also, be sure to go to www.atsapllc.com/byteclubpodcast to support us and help us create great future content. Until next time.